thousands more Gazans killed and displaced with no end in sight. As Israel reaffirms a vow to eliminate Hamas, an exodus of Palestinians moves further toward the border with Egypt. With only 11 partially functioning hospitals and people pushed to starvation, can anything stop the destruction? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Gaza. Outrage and condemnation from around the world have done little, if nothing, to help Gazans suffering more than 2 months under relentless bombardment. More than 18,000 have been killed and most of the population forced out of their homes. It fits the definition of war crimes, but still, efforts to force a ceasefire on Israel have all failed. Israel has said they will not stop until Hamas is eliminated and claims Hamas fighters are surrendering. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly already discussing a post-war phase where Gaza is under Israeli military control. We'll debate that in a minute, but first, a look at where Gaza stands now.
With the conflict in Gaza going on now for more than 2 months, Palestinians are running out of places to escape. Caught between two realities, death and displacement. Civilians have been seeking shelter in the south after being told to evacuate from the north for their own safety. But Israeli forces have also bombed southern Gaza's main city of Khan Yunis, leaving much of it uninhabitable.
The camp is in a desert and it's filled with insects and snakes. We are appealing to the world, seeing what we are going through. Please do something. If we don't get killed by the airstrikes, we will die of hunger.
Despite repeated calls by the international community for civilians to be spared the brunt of the conflict, Israel's assault shows no sign of slowing. Winter conditions have exacerbated the humanitarian crisis, with rain and wind scattering the tents of the displaced. The town of El Mawasi, the Israeli-designated safe zone along the Mediterranean coast, lacks a reliable supply of clean water, food, and medicine.
I fled with my brother-in-law and brothers from Gaza. We suffered from the war of cannons and escaped it to also be faced with the war of starvation.
The UN Security Council has been seeking an end to the fighting.
This is really a tragedy, and it has been too long. We have suffered too much. So for the Security Council, definitely to maintain peace and security is our primary responsibility. And we have tried very hard. And of course, we need to do more.
On Tuesday, 4 days after the U.S. vetoed a resolution which called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, the UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly in favor of stopping the fighting. 10 countries, including the U.S., Israel, and Austria, voted against. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees says an estimated 1.9 million people, meaning 85% of Gaza's population, have been internally displaced as of the 10th of December. At least 18,000 Palestinians have been killed and more than 49,000 others injured. But the lack of political consensus to stop this catastrophe means those numbers will continue to increase daily.
So no end in sight to the assault and no clear plan for the day after if the fighting ever stops. Joining me now to debate what's happening now and the future of Gaza are from Tel Aviv, author and columnist for Haaretz, Gideon Levy. From London is Chris Gunnis, the former spokesperson for UNRWA and now director of the Myanmar Accountability Project. And from Ramallah, it's Palestinian lawyer Hiba Husseini. She's been a legal advisor to Palestinian delegations in peace negotiations with Israel since 1994. Thanks all so much for being with me. Hiba, it's actually hard to know what to say at this point because it just keeps getting worse for Gazans, and nothing and no one can convince Netanyahu or the Israeli leadership to stop. Are we missing something here that could either begin negotiations or at the very least secure a ceasefire to abate the humanitarian crisis we're seeing now?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me and giving me this voice. I think the complexities go far beyond Netanyahu and Hamas. The role that the US and other Western allies and some Arab states have played in this war are part and parcel of the dilemma we are facing. And this is why things look terribly, horrifically bad to a point where we cannot convince Netanyahu and his government to even have a pause or a ceasefire. The Israeli government has set for itself high goals and said that it would not stop this war, this assault, which have caused over 80,000 civilian children and women and others to be killed until it destroys Hamas and uproots Hamas from the Gaza Strip. With these high goals, we have seen the fighting endlessly going on. So I think it's going to take a lot of interference and influence from the United States that has started the absolute support and rallied with it many others from the West. So although President Biden has been calling for restraint and humanitarian pauses, I think he needs to use much more leverages than that, because on the one hand, he declares, along with his that the administration, members of the administration, that they would like to have a pause. At the same time, they're sending more and more ammunitions and more planes and more tanks to Israel. And this double message is really giving leeway to Netanyahu to continue and proceed.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Gideon, Israel continues to say it's the beginning of the end for Hamas. I mean, is it the end of Hamas or just really the end of Gaza? Because even if they capture the top leaders of Hamas, they have arguably created a lot more militancy with their actions.
First of all, nobody can deny that this is the end of Gaza. You should just look at the images coming from Gaza in order to understand that this place is unlivable right now. And this catastrophe will accompany us now for years. Is it the end of Hamas? Define end of Hamas. What does it mean, end of Hamas? Can it be its end of military capability for a certain period of time? Yes, Israel can crash the military capability of Hamas for a limited time. Can it kill the idea of Hamas? No way. Can it kill its leadership? Yes, they can kill their leadership like Israel did with many other leaderships in the past. And you know what? Every time that Israel assassinated a whole generation of leadership in certain organizations and states, the replacement was much worse for Israel. So that's the state of things now.
That's the state of things now. But Gideon, what are Israelis, or at least the majority of them, saying to their leadership at this point about the path they've chosen here?
There was never such a consensus in Israel over the necessity of a war. There was never such a support, overall support from wall to wall toward the war. There was never so little tolerance to listen to any alternative voices in Israel. And Israel is standing together supporting this war, obviously by the direction of the media, which is in its peak in process of brainwashing. They never recruited themselves so much in the service of a war. And altogether is a very depressing picture. The two main sentiments in Israel are now crashing Hamas, obviously, and releasing the hostages. And Israelis believe, almost all of them, that for those two purposes, Israel is allowed to do whatever it wants.
So, Gideon, I want to talk to you a little bit further about the Israeli psyche in just a minute, but let me turn to Chris first, because, I mean, having heard that from inside Israel, and the fact that you spent so many years, Chris, in the occupied territories, you now head up an organization for accountability. So from what you know and what you've seen, is Israel just going to get away with this?
Well, I fear it may do, because as we saw in the Security Council last week, America is effectively giving Israel a get-out-of-jail-free card. But there is one big difference between 2014 and now, and that is that Palestine has accepted the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, and an investigation is ongoing. And if you look at the crimes, Articles 6, 7, and 8 of the Rome Statute, which define genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, it's very clear that there are grounds at least for an investigation. If you look at the fact that so many civilians have been killed, over 18,000 according to the Health Ministry, they say that
right.
over
Crystal,
70%
I'm going to interrupt
of those...
you there, because we actually did an entire program on legal accountability for Israel in this case, and there was a lot of kind of negativity towards whatever outcome the ICC could produce, especially since Israel will only argue that Hamas has committed the same atrocities. So, and we know.
I'm not saying for a moment that Hamas should not be investigated.
That's not what I'm saying. We're just saying that this would indicate the failure of any international proceedings against Israel in international courts.
Look, I am doing work in relation to Myanmar, and it's a very slow and frustrating process. That doesn't mean you give up on it. And if you're a Palestinian and you've been told time and time again that you will never get justice and you'll never get accountability, but there is now at least some glimmer of hope in a new process, there is an investigation, you know, woe betide anyone to say, oh, it's a waste of time, let's not do it. I think things are so desperate right now that all levers of accountability have to be pulled. There are lawyers around the world working to bring about universal jurisdiction cases against Israelis and Israeli generals and Israeli politicians for what is going on now in Gaza. Don't forget, in London, we had a situation where an Israeli general was nearly arrested. Tzipi Livni was nearly arrested. So, yes, I mean, it didn't work. But that does not mean, and I, by the way, as somebody working in the sphere of international criminal accountability, I have every right to be frustrated too. But that doesn't mean that I have the right to give up. And I will not. And I can see why a journalist or indeed anyone else might be cynical, but it is a lever that has to be pulled. And the other thing I think we have to say is that the discourse around international accountability, the very fact that there are people, governments and others in the world discussing issuing an arrest warrant against Netanyahu, just as it did against Putin. Okay, it may not happen, but that very discourse at least highlights the hypocrisy and the double standards. And I don't think that that is a bad thing at all.
Okay. Hiba, yeah, I mean, I hope you're right, Chris. I hope you're right. But, you know, people...
I'm not saying there will be justice. I'm not saying there will be justice. I'm not saying there will be accountability. All I'm saying, and Hiba is a lawyer, I'd like to know what she thinks, it is a lever that can be pulled. And even though it might not lead anywhere, I don't think that's a reason not to pull it.
Okay. I mean, Hiba, do you hold any confidence in the international jurisdiction of these courts that could bring criminal charges against Israel for what's happened?
I think, as I agree with Chris, I think, as Chris said, we have to push and we have to pursue every legal angle for justice. Just because there are shortcomings in the international legal system, that doesn't mean that we should give up. I definitely agree that we should be pursuing this.
Okay. Hiba, let me ask you this.
Can I just say something very quickly? I worked in Bosnia in the darkest days in the mid-90s. I was the UN spokesman when the Srebrenica massacre took place. 8,000 men were taken into a football stadium and gunned down. And we all collectively in the UN bowed our head in shame and said, what can be done? There'll be no justice. Years later, Milosevic was out of power.
Right, but there was unanimity in the UN
Let me finish.
At the
Please
time.
let me finish. Please let me finish. We all said nothing would be possible. Milosevic left power. the European Union made it clear that Serbia could only join the EU if they handed over Milosevic and Karadzic. And guess what? They were all handed over. It was years later, and there was a massive, massive change in the political landscape. I'm not saying that the political landscape will become more conducive to justice, but let's see what happens when Netanyahu leaves power, when he becomes politically dispensable.
But there's never been. I was just going to say it. It's a bit. There's never been the same kind of unanimity over Israel, especially at the UN.
No. And I'm not saying that. Yeah. And I'm not saying that the former Yugoslavia and Israel are the same. All I'm saying that things change, and when people become politically dispensable, and let's hope that Mr. Netanyahu does become politically dispensable very soon. I'd be interested to hear what Gideon has to say about that. Then let's see what might be possible.
Okay, Hiba, I'd like to move on to another issue with you, though, because we're hearing now that Netanyahu is actually somewhat counting on Qatar as far as the future of Gaza is concerned. I should have laid that context first. To devise some kind of rebuilding plan for Gaza, and that, second to that, Israel would absolutely refuse the PLA taking over the governance of Gaza. Meanwhile, the U.S. has said it wants to see kind of a revitalized Palestinian Authority for the day after if Israel manages to eliminate Hamas. Does that mean Israel can effectively decide which Palestinians are in charge of Palestine and even just refuse the U.S. demands outright?
Well, I think Netanyahu is way ahead of himself on this. He believes he can dictate for the Palestinians how they govern themselves and who will be governing Gaza and how the West Bank and Gaza Strip will be governed. Netanyahu's policies in the past have failed. This is why we are here today, and this is why we have a war on Gaza. He excluded and dismissed Abbas and the PA as his partners. He followed a containment policy and some sort of a cooperation policy also with Hamas. And all of these policies of conflict management have not succeeded. And the failure is being witnessed today. Now, for Netanyahu to invite Qatar to come and rebuild Gaza, Qatar can play an effective role like any other Arab country or Western country that wishes to be involved in the rebuilding, reconstruction, rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip. But without the Palestinians taking agency of their own destiny and their own future, this prospect that somebody else is going to do it for the Palestinians will go nowhere, will not go far.
Gideon, are you on the same page there? And I mean, what do you make of this? Does Netanyahu have a post-war vision other than somehow Gaza just being entirely under Israeli military control?
That's one of the main problems of this war, not the only one, obviously, that there is no plan about the day after, but none. You will ask any Israeli, and you will get the same answers. This will not be, and this will not be. This organ will not govern, and this organ will not govern. Who is going to be in Gaza? What will be in Gaza? Nobody knows. Israel went to this war with a lot of anger and frustrations and drive of taking revenge. But from day A, nobody knew what will be the outcome. I mean, what is the real goal the day after this war is ended, and even all the goals are achieved, and Hamas is totally crashed, vanished, doesn't exist, and all the hostages are fine and free, and then what? And you don't get an answer because there is no answer for Israel.
But Gideon, what about the two-state solution that the U.S. in particular seems to be, I guess, stuck on right now? What would that even be? And would it still be a state of apartheid if it's even possible?
It's a wonderful idea to share the land between the two peoples that are living there. It's a very just solution. The only tiny problem is that it's not achievable, and it will never be. Because in the West Bank, there are 700,000 settlers, who will never be evacuated. And as long as they are not evacuated, there is no room for a viable Palestinian state. It might be a Bantustan, but not more than this. And anyone who continues to talk about the two-state solution means to continue the occupation. Because I think that even those who suggest it now, when there is no partner, not in the Israeli side, hardly in the Palestinian side, when the settlers are at their peak in their political power in Israel, those who suggest it now know deep in their heart that this solution is dead long time ago. But that's another lip service of the West to show here we suggest something, here we do something for the Palestinian people. It's a hollow lip service, nothing but this.
Chris, I could see you agreeing there. Tell me then, Chris.
I just wanted.
Go ahead.
Sorry, after you. I was just going to add one thing. I agree entirely with what Hiba says about the Palestinians must have agency of some sort, though it's very hard to know what that would be. And I agree entirely with what Gideon is saying, that you're going to get a Bantustan in the West Bank, and that a two-state solution looks pretty bleak and impossible right now. The one thing I wanted to add, though, is that the mythology, the lie that Israelis had been sold since 67, since the occupation, that lie was that Israel could manage the Palestinian question as opposed to solve it, resolve it. Israelis were told the lie that you could build a wall around the Palestinians, you could blockade them, you could impose an apartheid system in the West Bank, you could arrest their children in the middle of the night, you could torture them in detention, you could do all these things, and you will get your security. That was the lie. That's what Israelis have been told time and time again since 1967. Vote for us, and we'll crush the Palestinians, and we'll manage the security. Well, guess what? On the 7th of October, that lie evaporated. After decades and decades of repression, of brutality, of an apartheid system, of a blockade, of violating international law, of collective punishment, after all these things, you got the 7th of October. Now, Israel's deep in trauma, and I don't know how Israel is going to process that new reality. Israel may go into amnesia yet again for another few decades, but that reality will return to haunt Israel. Israel's security depends on cooperation from the Palestinians, and that means you cannot carry on with the same policy. It's Einstein's definition of madness. You carry on
it still
with the
gives
same
me
policy,
chills when you say another few decades. I mean, because it just seems that there is more of the same to come, only worse for the Gazans in particular.
And it may be there are people talking increasingly, as they've done for many decades in Israel, of ethnically cleansing Gaza. Gideon will tell you more than I can tell you about Plan Dalet and the fact that Ben-Gurion had a plan to ethnically cleanse Palestine. Read Ilan Pappé's extraordinary book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. It's all there, chapter and verse. And maybe, whether it's expressed or not, Israel wants to drive all 2.3 million Gazans out into the Sinai and throw away the key and dump the problem on the Egyptians and dump the problem on UNHCR and dump the problem on the international community, because they've got away with doing that for decades.
And, you know, on that, Hiba, we said a while ago when it was requested that Egypt open the border, that it fit into Israel's grand plan to get everyone out, to ethnically cleanse Gaza, annex Gaza, and then refuse them the right to return. You know, the U.S. said that that would be a huge mistake, but it seems to be unfolding exactly like that, does it not?
Unfortunately, it's unfolding in that direction, and because the Gazans were pushed from the north to the south, and they are under very heavy bombardment right now. And they're being pushed and pushed, and food is not getting in, water is not getting in. And of course, the medical conditions in Gaza are very, very severe. But the fear also is that this is going to extend to the West Bank. And because we have been, I mean, look at the incursions in the West Bank. I mean, look at Jenin and Nablus and all the West Bank cities, and all the cities in the West Bank are also cut off and blocked. I mean, even for me personally, going between Ramallah and Jerusalem, Jerusalem is where I live on a daily basis. I cannot go like I used to be able to. So I get stuck at checkpoints for 3-4 hours just to go back home every evening. And that's what I mean. So the difficulties, and this is minimal compared to the incursions and the arrests that are taking place in the West Bank. So there's the fear is certainly there among the Palestinians that if Israel succeeds to transfer the population to Sinai, the Gaza population, then similar action is going to take place in the West Bank.
Yeah.
So yes, we have a problem and we have a dilemma, and we have to have a genuine solution. I agree with Gideon in that the two-state solution seems to be very, very far-fetched, especially with the large number of settlers in the West Bank.
Right.
And there is there's going to be no security, as Chris has been saying.
Indeed.
For Israel, if there is no genuine end to this occupation and to this oppression, and the resolution is not going to come by transferring the Gaza population to Sinai or the West Bank population to Jordan.
Gideon.
What instability are we going to create in the entire region? And the Palestinians have said, no, we don't want to. We'd rather die in Gaza than be transferred.
Okay. Gideon, can I give you 30 seconds for your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are that we are really in a crucial moment, and it's all about the international community to do something, not to talk, to do something, because the dangers are almost unlimited. This war is getting worse and worse, and there is no one to stop it. The consequences for after the war are not less serious, and the solution will not come from within the Middle East or from within Israel. No way. Israelis will not wake up one morning and say, oh, this apartheid state is not so nice, let's change it.
Okay.
It's all about the international community.
That will have to be the final word. So unfortunately, we're out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers, so I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.